welcome to another episode of CyberTangent. Today we're going to be talking to Grant Elliott about a deep dive into insider threats. Grant, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
It's good to have you. So Grant is currently the CEO and president of Ostendio, as well as the president of Healthcare Cloud Coalition. Now that's a not-for-profit group of stakeholders representing cloud computing, telecommunication, digital health, and healthcare companies in the healthcare sector. And Grant, you've clearly been around the block a number of times. Over 20 years of experience in operations and customer service and information security roles. Your track record in leading high-growth organizations speaks for itself. You've also developed quite a strong expertise in sectors like small sectors, right? Like communications and health IT and mobile health. So we're really looking forward to speaking with you today about this small topic of insider threat. So thanks again for being with us, Grant.
You're welcome. And that kind of bio is just another way of saying I'm getting old and I've been around a bit.
Oh, I thought you were going to say just getting started, but okay, we're getting old. Well, so in the spirit of just getting started, I feel like any stat I pick up about insider threat represents it as this massive contributor to our current cybersecurity challenge in the workplace and within enterprises. Help us understand, as we get this conversation going, Grant, help us understand what makes insider threats so hard to crack.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the fact that we still struggle to understand people's motivation. The reality is that organizations are made up of lots of different things, but the one thing that's the most unpredictable of them all are the people within the organization. What based on are they good at their job or they're not so good at their job? Have they been trained? And so fundamentally, the challenge we have is how do you take any organization, whether it be large or small, and how do you try and develop a one-size-fits-all mechanism that allows you to account for all those different characteristics? And I think that's kind of what organizations struggle with. If you look at a lot of the cyber tools out there today that try and do this, they kind of see the employee almost as the enemy, someone that has to be managed. And so they put lots of different controls to try and see if they can anticipate behavior through patterns, through different types of activities. And there's no doubt that can identify some levels of it. But, the human is so complex that, can you really through a system determine that, one day after someone working for an organization for 5 years, they're going to make a mistake? And so I think there's just so many variables that contribute to breaches occurring or incidents occurring through the kind of behavioral aspects of people that it's incredibly difficult for organizations to try and resolve that problem.
It is difficult, there's no doubt. And anybody you talk to on the inside who's trying to manage it would admit this. Let me ask this, where would you characterize on the evolution curve our organizations in their path towards really solving this problem? Just getting started, halfway through, near the end?
Well, it's interesting because, one of the other things that I do is I teach management theory and management concepts. And I really think that this comes down to just general behavioral theory. So, it depends on the maturity of an organization, how well they are from a management practice perspective. There are some very mature organizations that deploy lots of different tools and have really effective training, really good management support, and they move a lot more down that curve without completely eradicating the problem. And then you have the rest of the companies out there that almost give up on this concept, who aren't looking at more of the science, they're just more looking at it as how do I get through the day and generate revenue for my company. So I don't think necessarily that the problem is any more significant today than it's been for 1,000 years. I think today the challenge is that the impact of it and the output of what can happen when you have some sort of cyber threat incident has become more challenging. Understanding people's motivations, behaviours can change the same way, but whereas maybe 20 years ago someone would be accessing information in some sort of physical format and they could only use it so broadly. Today, someone clicking on a phishing link, you can have access to your entire production database, and so the implications are much bigger.
Here's where I get caught up, and maybe you can help me clear this up. As an employer, I like to think that I am managing my recruiting process to bring in the best of the best people as employees in my company. And I like to think that my teams and my entire company has the very best of intentions at all times. And yet I can't measure intentions. How can one measure how well they are doing with respect to managing insider risk?
So I think the key thing for me is that in the way we look at it is we don't look at this as a binary concept, whether everyone theoretically is capable of doing something that could potentially cause an incident or a concern, but you obviously have to break it down into what the motivation aspects are. Is someone doing it deliberately, or are they doing it by accident? Is someone doing what doesn't even knowing that they're actually doing it? And so I think you have to measure across multiple different domains. There's a preventative side to it. So are you taking appropriate preventative measures? Are you ensuring that people are adequately trained and educated, understand? And I'm not just talking about security. I'm talking about they understand the job, they understand the scope of the job, they understand what they're supposed to be doing, that they're motivated accordingly, that you're assessing, sort of motivation within the organisation. But then there's the more technical controls within the organisation, understanding, the behaviour of traffic within your organisation, how you segment the data, who has access to what data as well. And then there's obviously the reactive component. So there's the fact about are you doing effective monitoring to determine whether someone is getting into your network, you are actually having some sort of insider breach, etc. So I think you have to use a combination of all of that. There's no one simple solution that says this is our number. And I think more importantly, you have to measure that over the course of time. Now, one of the things that we try and do within our platform that we manage, we also try and give back to the employee, because we see lots of times organisations that they see that the employee almost as the enemy, they treat them in a sort of segmented manner. And the employee is all about give. The employee feels that I'm taking my training, I'm contributing and submitting my reports, I'm answering surveys, and doing all these things, but never getting anything back. What we try and do is we try and not only measure the employee in terms of their contribution, but actually give them information back as to how well they're doing, gamify the process so they can see if they're performing better than other people. And we tend to feel that, you want to get employees on your side so they're contributing with you, rather than them sort of feeling that they're just the token unit that you're managing. You want them involved in helping you solve the problem as well.
So you mentioned this intriguing concept of getting the employees on your side. Are there any particular approaches or methods that are particularly effective in achieving that, getting the employees on your side?
Yeah, I think you try and make the process engaging and collaborative, right? Again, we within our platform do a couple of things. We try and make sure that the training content we provide is very, very engaging and entertaining, so that it's not seen as a chore that they're having to go through. But just on the general day-to-day transactional tasks, we give the ability to measure what people are doing, appreciate the volume of what they're doing. That helps to try and sort of prevent them becoming disenfranchised within the organisation. But more importantly, providing that level of feedback. So again, within our platform, people can basically log in, and the first thing they see is their individual score, and they can benchmark that score against the organisation. Now, scoring is not you, and whether you give them a percentage of 93% or 75% necessarily means anything in isolation. But when you gamify that and you basically say, right, by the way, this positions you in the top half of the company, or the bottom half, as the case may be. This positions you in the top 5% of the company, the top 15%. And then you have an HR department that backs it up and starts rewarding good behaviour and rewarding performance. Mm-hmm. Too much of what we see in the industry is about penalising or punitive actions against people who make mistakes. We want to reward good behaviour and get people involved in it, get them contributing ideas, get them reporting things. We basically want to make sure that, again, we should be really arming our staff and our people as basically a front line of this, using them as an asset and not treating them as a liability.
That seems to make sense. So Grant, if you had two companies that you were looking at and you were asked to identify which one of these was better and which one was worse with respect to managing their insider risks, what top 2 or 3 things would you look at in order to make that determination?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually ask that a lot of the times, some of our organizations we talk to, in the sense that I've been quoted in various different blogs that I can normally have about a 2-minute conversation with the CEO of any organization, a reasonably good sense as to how good the security posture actually is. Okay. And really, the two things I look for, one is, if you ask people in the organization if they have a security program in place, if they're not an absolute yes, and they can describe it, then the organization really doesn't, because effective security and effective governance model means that everyone is basically signing off, everyone's involved, you've educated, you've trained, and there needs to be more than we take our annual security training. People have to be invested in this. So you can typically ask people in the organization, and if they're not giving you an enthusiastic, overwhelming, yes, we absolutely have the program in place, then the chances are they have something, but it's not effective enough. And the second one is just talking to the executive management team itself. Again, are they taking personal responsibility for the security program within their organization? If you speak to the CEO of an organization and he says, "Oh, I've got someone that manages that for me," then the chances are they don't have a very effective security program, because again, security, especially when you start talking about the concept of things like insider threat, has to involve has every single person in the organization invested, and that's from the CEO on the way down. So if the first response from the CEO is that she has someone else who's managing this, then it probably talks to the quality of the security program that they have in place, and that obviously extends to the insider security challenges or risk.
It's on my commute just this morning, I was trailing an old pickup truck with a bumper sticker that said, "Safety does not happen by accident." It sounds almost like you're saying security does not happen by accident when you offer these.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, there's no doubt that the likelihood of something happening, there's random events that happen out there, and you can't necessarily control what happens to you per se. You can absolutely control how you respond and how you basically react to that situation. And more importantly, again, as I mentioned, insider threats are not just about whether someone does something wrong or whether someone exposes a situation. It's about the extent to that event. So again, you can have someone clicking on a phishing link. Increasingly we're seeing lots of companies that do things like phishing training, phishing simulation, etc. And again, that doesn't mean to say because you're on phishing training, you should expect 100% of your employees never to click a phishing link. You're trying to reduce the likelihood that they're going to click it, but you still have to assume that one or two or some will. So everything's about trying to reduce the probability. Now, when someone does, how have you designed your systems to basically protect against that situation? How are you able to monitor and react to that situation? So it's not just about trying to reduce the likelihood of an event occurring, because, again, there's some external factors that you can't control, but it's about making sure you're reducing the likelihood of it happening, and then when something does happen, be able to identify it, detect it, and then do something about it.
Okay, so that question was about evaluating two companies. Let me ask a similar question about the employees themselves. On an individual employee basis, are there, and I know that your platform at Ostendio does a great job of tracking and managing and measuring everything from training to certifications and that type of thing. Have you found that there are, let's just say, leading indicators that would indicate that a particular employee is more susceptible to?
I think, I'm not going to quote specific ones, but there's definitely studies that show that, if you go, what are the reasons why people basically contribute to insider threat issues, right? One of them is competence. And so if you're not training your staff effectively, if you're not putting them in the right jobs, the right positions, if you're not giving them the right level of support, their level of competence is going to get impacted. And if their level of competence is impacted, they're more likely to make a mistake, and that mistake can translate to some form of breach or some sort of form of threat. So that's one example of where you make sure you're doing appropriate management of your employees, your training, making sure that they're trained effectively in their job and the role, have job descriptions, etc. They're more likely to perform adequately and not make mistakes. But then there's the other aspect of it, disillusioned or disenfranchised employees. Again, are you paying your staff effectively, right? Are you putting them in, one of the interesting things, if you look at healthcare specifically, especially in different countries around the world, the healthcare professionals are in many cases not paid a significant amount of money. So there's obviously a higher incident of likelihood, potentially economic incentives that could potentially have adverse behaviour. Other industries like education, etc. There's lots of areas where people are not economically rewarded well enough, which again increases the likelihood that potentially they could be open to some form of economic incentive to basically share data. And then there's just, again, people that just have a grudge against the company for whatever reason. So one example we like to give is even just things when you're offboarding employees, right? Up to the point where you've offboarded that employee, up to the point where they've walked out of your office. Are you managing that grievance process effectively? Are you understanding and making sure that, the person or the level of access to data they've got is appropriate? But even then after that, and again, a lot of issues that can happen is actually beyond the offboarding process. I think there's a study that says 80% of ex-employees have access to some form of internal application or service beyond the day they actually left the company as well. And so kind of managing those situations, you kind of drill down as to where these insider threats come from and try and come up with appropriate strategies depending on the motivation and the reason why that strategy is occurring.
So we can't prevent everything. I think I heard you say that earlier in our conversation. We know that. So that we can expect some level of either malicious and or non-malicious insider risky behavior. Are there behaviors or are there warning signs specific to insider threats that companies can be looking at and almost looking for, I think you called them early warning signs, to shortchange the damage that is done in these situations? Are there early warning signs that they can be looking for that would point to, hey, there's some insider behavior going on that you might want to take a look at?
Well, I think, if you're looking at, I'd look at this in two different ways. I think, if you look at an organizational structurally, do you think an organization particularly prone to that level of attack? I think you can just look at the security program, and there's probably, again, as I mentioned earlier on, there's not effective training going on, not good documentation around job roles, not good segmentation of data, etc. There's lots of, I think, indicators you can look at that's going to increase the likelihood that someone might be prone to that type of insider threat. But increasingly, there's some great tools out in the market today, which, again, look at behavioral indicators on the network as well. So, again, someone has a typical traffic flow on a day-to-day basis, and then, suddenly they start downloading lots of data, which is, again, alerts and indicators around changes of behavior in terms of how people are doing certain things, I think can absolutely be indicators that will point a security team to go and investigate further. I think we've seen with some of the major breaches that we've seen, some government breaches where people have been able to take data out of very secure environments, and people retrospectively look back and think, well, was that foreseeable? Was it not before? It's incredibly difficult if someone does a good job of covering the tracks and trying to do something deliberately. But I personally think for the things like, accidental, the things like demotivational or most of those can be identified down. So if you go to a company and they don't have an effective management structure in place, then absolutely they're far more likely to have some type of insider threat than if you go into an organization and, again, from a process, from a procedure, from a training, from education, from a intelligence of the workforce, qualification level, all of those things I think are all going to decrease the likelihood that someone's going to be motivated sufficiently or someone's going to be reckless enough to basically make some sort of mistake that will contribute to an insider threat.
So let's go on a cyber tangent just for a moment from our Inquisition here, Grant. I'm going to ask you to play almost a choose your own adventure type of a game, okay? And this may have happened to you before, so maybe you can just tell us a real story. Let's pretend that one of your dear friends who is in charge of cybersecurity, the CISO for a decent sized enterprise, comes to you and says, hey, Grant, you told us that training is important, so we've gone through 18 months of training and we've climbed the curve, and we are now at an astronomical level of compliance with respect to our training and even our testing of our own employees with respect to compliance to their behaviors. And it doesn't seem to be working. We're still widely susceptible to these risks, and we're still being damaged by them on a weekly basis or more often. What are the next three? And I know training is the one thing that we try to keep throwing at this, but what are the other 2 or 3 rocks that you're going to pick up for your friend and say, you should look here also, because these are the next things you should be looking at?
Well, just before we leave the concept of training, I think the key thing I would ask them is to make sure that how are you ensuring your training is being effective, right? So I think that the premise of the question was that somehow there's a scale that's improving. And so, and I bring that up because, I speak to lots of organizations that do pay for training and force their staff through training. But, there's a difference between forcing someone to watch a video for an hour once a year and actually taking them through, learning capabilities where you can actually ensure that people are actually absorbing and being educated. Yeah. And, again, from our perspective, we recommend that training's not like a one-time, you're training every week, every month. We have to do sort of like, 10 minutes a month and do like an hour a year. But let's just assume that, they're doing all that and, they're doing surveys and people are responding to the surveys and they're educated sufficiently. I think you have to then start going into what type of breaches are actually happening. At that point, it's probably not by accident that things are occurring. It's not because people don't know that they shouldn't do something. They either are not incented to, right? And so which they don't care. So you can take all the training you want, but why do I care whether I click this link? Why do I care if someone's phoning me up and asking this information? I know I'm not supposed to, but why do I care? So I think you have to look at the incentives. Maybe start putting bonuses together for maintaining specific security scores so that everyone's contributed, everyone has an incentive to feel a part of that particular issue. Then I think you also have to look at things like, well, are you as an organization particularly targeted, susceptible to those types of outreach? Are you your bank, a financial institution? Is the data you're managing significant values that's making you inordinately prone to people approaching or trying to attack? And then I think finally it's again looking at your technical capabilities. Again, Are you worried at the fact that maybe one or two people are clicking on the phishing link? Or are you worried at the fact that when they click on the phishing link, somehow that's exposing a broad set of data? And if you've ever spent any time on some of these phishing simulations, it is an interesting concept because although it's a kind of training component, but you see that it doesn't matter how often you send out the phishing simulations. There's always one or two people that seem to want to click on every single one, regardless of how they've been trained. Yeah. And I think it's interesting when you sort of go into that. So I think at a certain point, you have to start looking at, okay, well, if there's people that will not adopt or adapt to the situation, then you have to think about who you've got working in your organization to potentially make changes.
So let me pull on that thread just for a moment. With all respect to the executives in our audience, executives are notoriously resistant to training, right? And you couple that with the fact that executives are one of the primary targets for insider threat type of activities and phishing type of activities, certainly. What is your take on that? Help me understand, help me get your observations on that dynamic.
So when I was a CISO, and I used to have to pull together the data security audits for my organization. Actually, our CFO was the one that I found the most difficult to actually get his information to us. And he always had a very good, legitimate reason. It was the quarterly board report, or it was the end of quarter returns, or there was some legitimate reason theoretically why it was difficult for him to get around to doing it. And if I go to the CEO and talk about it, the CEO will go, he's very busy, etc. To me, transparency has to be the key, from the CEO all the way down to the lowest level employee. Everyone needs to understand that they're equally prone, equally susceptible, equally culpable to contributing to some sort of security breach or insider threat. So the only way to basically make sure that everyone understands that's the case is that basically you're completely transparent. And so in our platform, what we specifically do is we basically share the score of every single person within the organization. So we have CEOs of our customers basically emailing their staff, basically saying, look, I'm not 100% according to the system. Why is everyone else not 100%? And gamifying that from an organizational to an individual score and making sure that everyone understands the contribution, I think that's the kind of way to basically make sure that everyone feels that they're contributing. And it's amazingly liberating for everyone, I think, and we've seen that as well. But more importantly, I think if the CEO or the executive team believes that actually by leading by example and it's been transparently seen that they can actually increase the score of the entire organization and vice versa as the case may be, then I think that's the best way to basically try and ensure that everyone within the organization, including the executives who, as we often can be the worst offenders, are contributing to the overall posture of the organization.
Let's keep picking on the executives, I guess, for just a moment. If you were walking into an organization, let's call it a new organization that you were going to help structure a new program, I should say, around managing insider threats and insider risks, what functions would you ideally have in that room? I mean, obviously we would have the security function and probably the IT function and let's say the CEO, but who else would you ideally have in that room as head of the functions in order to capture that executive buy-in?
Well, I think this applies to general security overall, because we're talking about insider threats specifically here, which is, again, how are the individuals within the organization contributing to the likelihood of a data breach? But fundamentally, what we're trying to do, we're trying to protect data, and we need to understand where that data is. I think one of the things that makes security difficult in general, and this applies to insider threat as well, is that it impacts every organization within the company, because every department, every group, every individual has access to some level of data. Now, we sometimes discount the types of data we have. If you're in healthcare, you think the only sensitive data is PHI. If you're in finance industry, you think the only sensitive data is credit card information. But the reality is, organizations have lots of sensitive data, from the financial information to employer information. There's lots of data across the organization that may or may not be valuable to third parties. And so the key thing is, where is that data stored? And if there's a department or a function that has sensitive data or any type of data that needs to be protected, they need to be involved in the process, because you can, if you have an organizational structure is just an artificial alignment to help you organize how your company performs its core tasks. And so because it's artificial, data doesn't necessarily flow through that artificial structure. And so you have to basically organize your security program based on where the data flows and who has access to that data.
Sure.
So the kind of short answer to that is, you really need representation from whoever you've organized your company. You need representation from the core elements of that, because fundamentally they need to understand how the rules that you put in place apply to their specific area and the specific data they have. So everything from just classifying the data, make sure that you can classify between what's confidential, what's sensitive, what's not, all the way through to what tools and mechanisms and systems are you using to protect the data. So as we've talked extensively about training their staff and what type of training and availability as well. So again, you have to put that team together that can be representative of the entire organization.
So cybersecurity has a reputation in general for being a very fast-moving technological arena. Let me ask this. What major developments, either technological or procedural, are you watching that could have a significant impact in the near term on insider threat management?
So I think from a security general perspective, and I think this applies to insider threat as well, I think blockchain has a huge implication for cybersecurity moving forward. And I think we're a little bit away from it, but when you think about how you're basically tracking and managing access to data, things like supply chains, being able to store the history of, for example, a compliance token. So again, digital IDs and whether people themselves are being personally trained in maintaining their current credentialing, their certification, etc. All of these things, I think, are difficult as an organisation to manage because they tend to be very slow, and very difficult. And one of the things that we're working on right now is because our platform manages effectively, think of it as the DNA of an organisation based on the behavioural activities of everyone within the organisation, we can literally take a snapshot at any moment in time as to how that organisation is performing against a specific standard or regulation. Think of that as the effective regulatory DNA of the organisation. If we can basically put that into a sort of digital ledger that maintains the history of that information, and then we can then find a third-party digital signing authority like a CPA that will sign against a software or an auditor against a NIST 800 171 or some sort of standard that we know that organisation is behaving against that on an ongoing basis. Then think of the power of them going to their customers and saying, hey, listen, I'm just going to give you access to my digital certificate on this ledger here, and we're going to build in smart contract penalties that basically say that you're going to pay me X for the service. If I fail to maintain this behavioural activity within my organisation against a specific standard or regulation, then you basically can default the contract or apply financial penalties, etc. So now you get a situation where you go back to what motivates organisations to be secure. And I wish it was that they were scared of breaches. It's not. It's typically because they want to persuade and demonstrate to their customers that they're operating in a secure environment. In that situation, their customer is basically now some sort of assurance that their vendor is going to be operating with security first and foremost, because otherwise there's financial penalties if they don't. And then the actual organisation has the ability to basically share that out to multiple customers as well. And so just by behaving the right way day to day, this is all being tracked effectively. And basically blockchain, smart contracts allow the technical tracking and management of that in a way that's way simpler than it possibly could be today and using other methods.
This is great, Grant. And as we wrap up our conversation, let me ask this final question. So let's say you and I have an opportunity to sit down and have another 30-minute conversation, let's say in 3 years from now, about insider threat and insider risk management. What are we talking about? What are the hot topics and what's changed between now and our conversation in 3 years from now?
I think from my perspective, I think the likelihood you're going to find is probably we're going to have exactly the same conversation. And I don't think a lot of things are really going to have changed because, as I mentioned, I think at the outset, really the biggest challenge with insider threat is human behavior. It's trying to predict what the human does. Again, with the likes of big data, we're getting better at predicting that behavior. But, when I log into my Facebook account and I see what they recommend I should be buying or based on my previous preferences, right, they still can't get that right. So there's lots of people really trying to work on how do you anticipate what a person is going to do next. And there's no doubt that that is going to continue to improve from an investment perspective. But outside of that, it's difficult for me to see that much is going to change from an insider threat perspective because I think people are people, and this is why it's been a topic. The highest levels are reasons why organizations have breaches. And it's one of the hardest chestnuts to crack because people are just so different. I
think that's true. And I think that contributes to some job security for experts like you, Grant.
Well, and I like to advise people when I'm giving them career advice about cybersecurity. The good thing about getting into cybersecurity is that you get two paths you can take. You can either be on the defensive side or on the attacking side.
There you go. I prefer the defensive side myself. And you're much like many of the other defenders that I've talked to who are very reluctant to try to predict the future. So you're in good You're in good company, Grant. Well, hey, I appreciate our conversation. This has been wonderful, and thank you for your perspective, Grant, on insider threats.
It's been a delight. I've enjoyed it very much, and it's a great topic. And if you give me 3 hours, I'd be more than happy to continue. But I know that the audience will get bored after 20, so I'm happy to stop there.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again to Grant Elliott, CEO and President of Ostendio. Thanks, Grant. Have a good day.
Thanks very much. I very much appreciate the time. Thank you very much.